Luis Merchant, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
John, thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from the Miami, Florida area. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the shifting human capital strategies to acquire talent within a very particular and specific industry. We're going to be talking about the cannabis industry. Now, we've talked a lot on this podcast about the changing nature of work, about the Great Resignation, acquiring talent, human capital strategy. All of those things are things that we've discussed at length in the past with other guests, but we've never actually specifically talked about these things within the cannabis industry, which is a huge growing industry. So I'm really excited to explore this with you. As we get started, I just wanted to share Luis's bio with everybody. Luis Merchant, President and CEO of Flora Growth Corp, is a New York and Miami-based executive with over a decade of proven experience in enterprise sales management, corporate strategy, merchandising, and expense management and customer experience. Prior to joining the team at Flora Growth, he previously served as Macy's Inc.'s Vice President of Workforce Strategy and Operations, where he managed the enterprise's multi-billion-dollar P&L expense line for the 540 store portfolio, and led various sales and marketing initiatives, including the business-to-business corporate sales team responsible for 160 million in annual revenues. And really, I could go on and on, Luis, but I'm going to pause there. I'm going to give you a chance to share anything else about yourself, your background, your career that you would really like to highlight for me and my listeners.
Of course, John, look, you've said it all. I was originally born in Colombia, came to the States about 20 years ago to get my MBA. Met my wife in Louisiana, and she decided we were going to live in the States. I've had a very fruitful career in retail and CPG. Have lived in a number of states, 5 of them, and 7 moves over the last 2 decades. So very familiar with the American consumer, of course. And as you mentioned, my latter part of my career was at Macy's, where I had a number of roles of increasing importance. And of course, I couldn't be happier to be representing Flora as their CEO and the chairman.
Wonderful, wonderful. Why don't we start off for anyone who may be unfamiliar with the cannabis industry? Again, it's kind of a fastly growing, rapidly expanding industry in lieu of many of the states around the nation legalizing either medical marijuana or even recreational marijuana. So talk to us a little bit more about the industry generally, and then we can zoom in on shifting human capital strategy.
Yeah, of course, Jonathan. I mean, the global industry, and it's a global industry, right? Is booming, and it's just at the early stages, but it's already estimated at over $200 billion. Out of those $200 billion, almost 50% of the revenue contribution is coming from the United States. As you know, over 35 states have legalized medicinal cannabis. 15 states have legalized recreational cannabis. There are a number of products and categories that are already broadly distributed in 48 out of the 50 states. It's a booming industry, and of course, one that represents what we believe is a generational opportunity for consumers to move from chemical to plant-based wellness alternatives.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, even in a place like Utah, we're among the reddest of red states, super conservative, and we also have legalized medical marijuana in Utah even. So it really is becoming more and more acceptable and accessible to many across the nation, and like you said, even across the world. And this is giving us a tremendous opportunity for business leaders who want to explore this, right? But with that expansion, with that growth, also means that we're dealing with tremendous labor challenges. And this gets us into the human capital strategy and the challenges that organizations are going to face as they're scaling within this industry. So talk to us a little bit about that, what you've seen, what some of the struggles have been for you and your company, as this market continues to expand.
Yes, John, I was thinking before our interview about that specific question. And I think I would start by sharing my personal story. I had a very traditional trajectory as a professional. I'm an engineer, I have an MBA, went to graduate school, then I got a job at a very reputable top Fortune 100 company, and then continued to move up the corporate ladder. And I think for professionals today, they're looking for a balance between advancing their skill set, advancing their careers, and also identifying those opportunities where they can take some risks that will accelerate their careers in a meaningful way. And that's where the cannabis industry is at, right? It's a hyper growth industry, but it has a lot of stigma and there's a lot of risk attached to it. There's been an incredible boom in the stock market in the late 2018, 2019. Then there's been a tremendous cycle of the stocks coming down, and now the industry is in a little bit of a lull as well. All in the fundamentals of the industry are continuing to improve. So I think for a company like mine, it's incredibly important to show candidates why this industry has long-term potential. And once we're able to show that to talent that is in more traditional industries, they're more willing to come and take the risk and jump on board.
Yeah, so there's certainly the risk, with just a new emerging industry, right? That's certainly the case, as you just described. There's also the social stigma around cannabis, and I think that's lessening, right? But we have the in the United States, for example, the war on drugs and this, the criminalization of marijuana, possession of marijuana, even 3 strikes laws, all of this, right? So we have all of that baggage, all of that social context around the usage of it. And I think, especially for medical use, it seems like that stigma is getting quickly erased. But I think it's still there largely for recreational use, at least in many parts of the country. And so I imagine that makes it challenging sometimes to hire good talent, when people may have some, either it's just the social stigma or they may have some sort of a moral, ethical kind of hang up about, working within the industry, working in a cannabis company. Thoughts on that and how you've addressed that in recent years?
Yeah, and it's a great question that you're posing, John. But when you think about the alcohol and tobacco industries, they're facing similar dilemmas in terms of what is considered a potential ethical or social stigma, right? We know that tobacco is really bad for your health. Still, like some of the tobacco companies are some of the biggest companies out there in the world. Now, the difference between cannabis and alcohol and tobacco and some of the other vice industries that are out there is that cannabis not only presents opportunities from a recreational standpoint, but it also presents a tremendous amount of benefits from a therapeutic and pharmaceutical standpoint. There's enough scientific-based research already published today that shows that cannabis can treat a number of ailments. And there's a number of them that are plaguing humanity today, like pain, and as an alternative to opioids, which are addictive, like insomnia, like anxiety. And then, of course, there's been medications that are already broadly approved to treat epilepsy and other related brain illnesses. So you have the two components, a recreational one, but you also have this really clear path, scientific path to treat and improve the lives of people that are suffering from many ailments. So I think when you rely on scientific-based research and you can highlight that for perhaps candidates that have a higher social stigma, they're more likely to start joining companies such as ours.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And you're absolutely right. The increasing scientific evidence around the medical uses and the therapeutic uses of cannabis, it's continuing to pile up. It's quite staggering. And it's interesting. I was just, I walk my dog. I have 2 dogs. I walk my dogs around the neighborhood daily, usually at least a couple times a day. And so I get to know my neighbors a little bit. And I have an elderly couple that's just kind of around the corner, around the block from me. And I often run into them and just say hi. And they're probably, I don't know for sure, but they're probably mid-70s, super conservative, super, just rigid around that social stigma, right? And then they received the horrible news that the wife had cancer, right? And she's dealing with chemo and all of the challenges associated with that, just feeling miserable like death, just everything that comes with it. Just such a horrible disease. I was walking around the park and I ran into him, the husband, one day just a month or so ago. And I was actually quite shocked. I was pleased, but I was shocked that they talked about how they had just gotten her medical cannabis card so that she could take medical marijuana. And literally within 2 or 3 days of starting to use marijuana, it relieved almost all of her symptoms and the negative outcomes of chemo, all of that. She was suffering so much. And then all of a sudden, almost like the light switch was flipping. She was feeling so much better. She was able to function. She was able to get out. She was able to just live her life. And this was a couple I never in a million years would have thought they would have embraced cannabis. But it just shows how quickly public attitude is changing and how quickly that stigma is declining. And I think for good reason, right? Because there are so many tremendous benefits. And even when you get to the recreational side, if there's still stigma and people are concerned, yeah, you think about it in comparison to things like cigarettes, vaping, alcohol consumption. I personally would really love for my children, I have 6 children. I would love, especially for my teenagers, I would love for them to not drink. I would love for them to not do recreational drugs. I would love for them to not smoke or vape or any of those things because of the negative health consequences. But if they're going to do anything, I mean, I certainly marijuana usage seems like the least problematic from a recreational standpoint. And I don't know if that's a generational attitude that's just shifting over time. But it sure seems like younger generations just don't see it as the big problem that previous generations did. And the whole notion of the war on drugs, including marijuana, almost seems silly, if not just completely damaging and harmful to many of the younger generation.
Yeah, John, I mean, I couldn't agree more with all of your comments. And I think, it's important to highlight that cannabis is impacting the lives of multi-generation groups, right? You mentioned your teenage children, and you also mentioned your 70-year-old neighbors. Like people from all age groups are starting to adopt cannabis as an alternative to more harmful recreational uses or more harmful medicinal alternatives to treat ailments. And it's happening all over the world. And I think we need to do a better job. And we're focusing on that at PHRa, at educating consumers, at educating patients, and educating the medical community so they become comfortable. Like, I mean, in a big part of our work right now is to show doctors that you can actually prescribe cannabis, which is now, like in countries like Colombia, you can actually prescribe cannabis and it's covered by your health insurance. But doctors are apprehensive because they don't understand what type of ailments they can cover on their cannabis. So we have to educate them, right? And it's incredibly important that we spend time doing that. And when we're talking to candidates, going back to the component of attracting incredible talent, you have to highlight for them the many benefits that this industry is actually providing. When it comes to the war on drugs, it's also, when people think about the war on drugs, they no longer think about cannabis or marijuana. That's just not what the war on drugs it means anymore to any demographic at this point. I do believe that there's a little bit of work to do with regards to the government and the regulatory framework as it exists today to ensure that the entire population can feel comfortable. One of the big unlocks for many generations to actually adopt cannabis would be for them to find cannabis products in their local convenience store or their local department store. And that is not going to happen until the MORE or the SAFE Act are passed. Once those two things happen, then I believe we're going to see a meaningful change in terms of attitude. And I think we're really going to have an influx of talent into the industry.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful. And I think this is an ever evolving and developing kind of an area. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about some of the biggest talent needs that you have within the industry. I mean, certainly like any industry, you have across all functional areas, you need people, good people. But where do you find the biggest gap in the needs that you have versus what you seem to be getting. I'm sure your industry is struggling with the Great Resignation and with people opting out of, traditional styles of work and doing more gig work and doing more contract work and whatever. I'm sure you're dealing with that just like everyone else. But where do you see that biggest gap?
Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. Surprisingly, the needs of the cannabis industry are very similar to the needs of any other industry, John. So you hit that right in the head. We very quickly had to adopt a very flexible work policy. We do not require any of our hires to move. So in order for us to capture the biggest pool and the best pool of talent, we broaden our scope to the world, basically. And we have people working in Calgary, in Toronto, in Miami, in Fort Lauderdale, in San Diego, in Colombia, all over the world. They're working where they lived. And if they so choose to move to our headquarters here in Miami, then we can help them relocating. But we don't find that as a requirement. And that has really opened up the talent pool significantly to us. But I think where we're missing is some skill set across all functions. And the skill set is, in the cannabis industry, a lot of what we're doing is the first time we're doing it. Right? So there's a lot of firsts. And when you're doing things for the first time, you truly need an entrepreneurial spirit, but you also need people that understand how a fully developed functioning company works. And it's very hard to find both of those. And you need that type of agility across all functions in the organization. When it's difficult just to secure capital because you don't have access to traditional capital like every other industry, or you don't have access to traditional payroll like every other industry does, you need a finance head that is able to understand this very complex environment and find solutions that have not been developed before, right? When you have never moved a product from one country to another, it's the first time doing it, then you need to have somebody that understands supply chain, that understands regulatory framework, and that can also invent that new path for the first time. So the type of ingenuity is found in the entrepreneur world, but you also need, as I mentioned, the well-formed corporate, more traditional route. And that's where we find the gaps.
Yeah, I think that's really great framing of the gaps and the challenges that you're dealing with. Like you said, similarities to other industries, of course, but there are some unique aspects of this particular industry and just the nascent stage of the industry, right? And the development, the growth of it brings unique challenges. And you said it, the entrepreneurial spirit, the entrepreneurial mindset, I think is as important now. I mean, really in any business, I think that's important. You need agile people willing to adapt and to adopt and change as the needs of the market change around them, but particularly in an emerging market, in an industry like this, I think you just have to be super adaptive if you hope to weather the challenges that are inevitable that are going to come, and just dealing with things like, there's social stigma in many products and industries, but the nature of this particular industry and this particular set of products, has a unique history, has a unique set of stigmas that you are going to have to continue to tackle as you move forward. So I think all of that's great. Last thing I wanted to ask about this, not specifically in relation to talent, but in relation to the regulatory environment around cannabis, and what you're seeing in some of the most recent changes there, and if that's affecting your human capital strategy at all.
Well, it certainly is. I would say there's two ways in which I can answer this question: is the regulatory environment inside of the United States, and then that outside of the United States is exceptionally complex. Inside the US, we do know there is a path to sell and broadly distribute CBD, which is the non-psychoactive, non-intoxicating molecule of cannabis. And then there is also a pathway for the psychoactive molecule of cannabis, THC. But there are over 100 molecules in the cannabis plant. And some of them are called the minors, and those are unregulated today. And there is a meaningful move from state legislatures to find a way to regulate these minor cannabinoids. And that is going to add complexity to product development, product distribution, sales, and some of them are psychoactive, some of them are not. It's very complex, and that just means that we need to be additionally extra vigilant about what we are doing in every one of the geographies in which we operate. And then from a broader perspective, we're waiting to see a meaningful change in a couple of places around the world. Germany is a big one. Germany is about to go recreational. We believe it's going to happen over the next 12 months. That is very exciting. We're also waiting for the UN to make a move that will effectively legalize the trade of cannabis on a global scale. And if that were to happen, I think we're going to be able to meaningfully attract more traditional industry professionals that would likely understand the potential of cannabis over the long term.
Wonderful, wonderful. Luis, it has been a real pleasure and a fascinating conversation. I appreciate your time and that you've shared your insights with me and my listeners. We're getting close to the end of our time. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can connect with you and find out more about your work, your team, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Of course, John. So if anyone wants to contact us, we are at FloraGrowth.com. We are on every social media platform. And of course, we are on LinkedIn. My name is Luis Merchant, and please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. With regards to human capital, it has been the single biggest foundation of our company. We have only focused on acquiring and attracting the best talent at all levels in the organization. Our team is a multidisciplinary team, from our chairman of the board all the way to agricultural skilled workers in Colombia. We have attracted incredible talent. And if you want to join an industry that has very long-term potential, that will only continue to grow over the next 10 years, that will present significant challenges, but also it will be a very fun environment to work in, please feel free to reach out to us because we're hiring, we're growing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Luis. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Luis and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.